Three ruthless outlaws pushed through the swinging doors of the $silver saloon, their boots echoing against weathered floorboards as they sized up their latest target. Instead of finding easy prey, they'd unknowingly walked straight into the path of Catherine Swift-Hand Reynolds, the deadliest gunslinger the Montana Territory had ever known. What unfolded that night would expose a vast conspiracy of corruption, bring down a criminal empire, and reveal how the most dangerous predator in all the West had been hiding behind a bar, serving whiskey with a smile. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the grimy windows of the Silver Dollar as Catherine methodically dried glasses behind the bar, each movement deliberate and efficient. Years of ensuring nothing would hinder her lightning-fast draw had turned even simple tasks into precise routines. The usual crowd was thin. A few weather-beaten miners playing cards in the corner, while old Samuel coaxed a melancholy tune from the saloon's battered piano. Through dust-streaked windows, Catherine watched Sheriff Clayton make his daily rounds, carefully avoiding eye contact with the saloon, another sign that something was seriously wrong with law enforcement in Shadow Creek. 2 months she'd been here, watching and waiting, gathering intelligence about the strange happenings in this boomtown. Honest miners being forced off their claims, mysterious accidents at operations that refused to sell, and a mining company survey team that seemed more interested in intimidation than measuring ore yields. Maria Delgado emerged from the kitchen, wiping flour from her hands. The cook had become Catherine's most trusted ally in town, her eyes and ears among the Mexican workers who saw everything but were rarely noticed by the power brokers plotting Shadow Creek's future. "More riders coming," Maria whispered in Spanish, a language few knew Catherine had mastered during her years hunting outlaws along the border territories. "Black hats, expensive horses. Black Hawk gang buy their gear." Catherine's hand paused mid-polish, her keen ears picking up the approaching hoofbeats. The Black Hawk gang, hired killers, masquerading as mining company security. They'd been showing up more frequently lately, testing boundaries, pressuring businesses. Their reputation for ruthlessness had cleared their path across 3 territories, leaving broken lives and stolen claims in their wake. Most folks only whispered about them, but Catherine had crossed paths with their kind before. The saloon doors burst open as 3 men swaggered in, spurs jingling against the wooden floor. Catherine recognized their leader instantly. Lucas Black, Jack Hawkins, former cavalry officer turned hired gun. His signature black leather vest had notches carved along the edges, each representing someone who'd crossed him and paid the ultimate price. Behind him, his lieutenants spread out with practiced precision, Cole Serpent Davis covering the back door, while Quick Draw Riley drifted toward the stairs, cutting off any escape route. "Evening, miss," Hawkins drawled, sliding onto a bar stool, with calculated grace. His smile never reached his cold eyes as he surveyed the saloon. "Heard tell this place serves the finest whiskey in the territory." Catherine set down her cleaning rag, keeping her movements casual despite the tension humming through her body. "We serve whiskey," she replied evenly. "Whether it's the finest depends on the drinker's taste." Riley snorted, moving closer to examine the gun collection mounted on the wall, vintage pieces Catherine had carefully selected to appear decorative rather than practical. His expert gaze lingered too long on certain weapons, assessing their value with professional interest. "Nice collection," he commented. "Your late husband's, I assume?" "Just appreciating history," Catherine replied, noting how his hand kept straying to his own weapon, a custom Remington with pearl grips. She'd heard stories about that gun, about how fast it could appear in Riley's hand when trouble started. But she'd seen faster. Been faster. Maria appeared in the kitchen doorway, her dark eyes meeting Catherine's briefly. A silent warning passed between them. They'd witnessed this pattern before in other towns. First came the polite visits, then the suggestions, and finally the threats. All part of a carefully orchestrated campaign to convince locals that selling their businesses to the mining company was in their best interest. Speaking of history, Hawkins continued, his voice carrying that dangerous edge Catherine remembered from wanted posters that had once adorned Marshall's offices across the West. Mr. Sullivan mentioned you only acquired this place a few months back after the unfortunate accident that befell old Tom Bennett. Catherine kept her expression neutral, even as her mind raced. William Sullivan, the mining company's head of security, had been asking questions about her background. Mr. Sullivan seems well informed about local business matters. He takes an interest, Hawkins replied absently, running a finger along one of the notches in his vest. Man in his position likes to know who's who in a growing town like Shadow Creek. He paused, studying her with predatory intensity. Thing is, we did some asking around ourselves. Nobody seems to know much about Catherine Reynolds before she showed up here. Not much to know, Catherine said, placing a glass of water in front of Hawkins without being asked, a subtle reminder that she'd been reading people long before he'd walked through her doors. Just looking for a quiet place to settle down. The crash of Riley deliberately knocking over a chair echoed through the saloon, but Catherine didn't flinch. Her eyes tracked every movement, noting positions, angles, distances, information that had once meant the difference between life and death in a dozen frontier towns. Quiet's overrated, Hawkins said, his friendly facade slipping slightly. Towns. Changing, growing. Smart business owners know when to adapt, when to accept new partnership opportunities. Catherine met his gaze steadily. I prefer to keep things simple. Just me, my saloon, and my regular customers. Might want to reconsider that stance. Hawkins stood, placing a business card on the bar. The mining company's logo was prominently displayed, along with a handwritten number. Things happen in small towns, fires, accidents, troublemakers causing problems. Good to have friends watching your back. Is that what happened to the Delgado ranch? Maria asked from the kitchen doorway. Too many accidents, Hawkins' expression hardened. A tragic situation. Should have had better insurance. Catherine picked up the card, noting the elaborate letterhead and Sullivan's personal seal. I'll keep it in mind. You do that. Hawkins motioned to his men. We'll be seeing you real soon, Miss Reynolds. Real soon indeed. After they left, Maria locked the door and turned the sign to closed. They moved with the synchronization of people who had done this before, securing windows and doors while processing that their daily performance had fooled another set of predators. They're getting bolder, Maria said in Spanish, watching through the window as the Black Hawk riders disappeared into the gathering dusk. First the Delgado ranch, then the Bennett place. Now they're here. Catherine studied Hawkins' business card, her mind already connecting pieces of a larger puzzle. The Black Hawk gang was too organized, too methodical for simple intimidation. Their movements suggested military precision, their territory expansion too carefully planned. Each piece of property they'd seized formed a pattern she'd seen before, one that spoke of something much bigger than a simple mining company land grab. Send word to Michael, she told Maria. Tell him to watch the old copper mine tonight. Something tells me our new friends aren't just running a protection racket. Maria nodded, understanding the subtext. Michael was one of Catherine's old contacts, a former Texas Ranger who now worked as a private investigator. If the Black Hawk gang was up to something bigger, they'd need evidence. Catherine moved to the back office, pulling out a locked box she hadn't opened in months. Inside lay the tools of her former trade, a match pair of custom Colts with shortened barrels for faster drawing, their blued steel unblemished despite the dozens of gunfights they'd seen. 3 years of quiet observation were about to end. As she checked her weapons with practiced efficiency, Catherine thought about Riley's interest in the wall-mounted guns, Hawkins' military-style tactics, and Sullivan's sudden curiosity about her background. The pieces were there, forming a picture she'd seen before in other towns, but this time she had the advantage. They thought they were dealing with a simple saloon owner, never suspecting that Catherine Swift-Hand Reynolds had spent 8 years as the most feared gunslinger in 3 territories. The first stars were appearing in the darkening sky as Catherine loaded her revolvers, each motion smooth and precise. Sometimes, she reflected, the most dangerous predator wasn't the one wearing the black vest or flashing pearl-handled revolvers. Sometimes it was the one hiding in plain sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Thunder rolled across the Montana sky as Catherine moved through her evening closing routine with practiced efficiency, her mind working through the implications of the Black Hawk gang's visit. Through the rain-streaked windows, occasional flashes of lightning illuminated the town's muddy main street, now deserted except for the occasional hurried figure rushing for shelter. The walls of the Silver Dollar held their own stories, told in the weathered wood and faded photographs that decorated the space. Catherine had chosen each image carefully when she'd taken over the place, scenes of the old frontier, carefully selected to reinforce her cover as a simple woman trying to preserve a piece of history. But like everything else about Catherine Reynolds, there were layers of truth hidden beneath the obvious. "They'll be back tomorrow," Maria said, emerging from the kitchen with a pot of coffee. The older woman's face carried the weathered wisdom of someone who'd seen too many small towns fall to powerful interests. "Sullivan's men never make just one visit." Catherine nodded, accepting a cup of the strong brew. "Tell me about Sullivan. Everything you've heard, everything people whisper when they think no one's listening." Maria settled into a chair, her dark eyes distant with memory. "He arrived 4 months ago with the mining company survey team. Perfect manners, expensive suits, always talking about progress and opportunity, but there was something else." She paused, searching for the right words. "Something in the way he watched people like a cat studying mice." "When did the accident start?" 2 weeks after he came. "First, it was small things, damaged equipment, scattered supplies. Then the fires started breaking out at claims that had refused to sell. The sheriff investigated, of course, but somehow never found anything suspicious. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." Catherine's fingers absently traced the grain of the wooden bar, feeling the stories hidden in its worn surface. "And the Black Hawk gang. They showed up a month ago. At first they said they were just mining company security, protecting the survey teams. But then people started disappearing. Miguel's brother Rafael saw something he shouldn't have out near the copper mine. Next day, he was gone, left a half-eaten breakfast on his table and never came back." Lightning flashed again, and Catherine caught her reflection in the back bar mirror. For a moment, she saw herself as she'd been before. Younger, harder, the legendary Swift Hand who'd brought justice to a lawless frontier. She'd earned that name in a shootout in Deadwood, taking down 4 members of the notorious Jackson gang before they could even clear leather. The 5th had managed to fire once, missing widely before joining his brothers in the dust. The memory brought others with it. 8 years of tracking the worst the territories had to offer, bringing them to justice one bullet at a time. She'd developed a reputation for never missing, never losing her quarry, and never backing down from a fight. But with that reputation had come a price, one she'd paid in blood and loss until she'd finally walked away. A knock at the back door interrupted her thoughts. Maria tensed, but Catherine recognized the pattern. 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 more. Michael's signal. She opened the door to find the former Texas Ranger dripping on her back step, his duster heavy with rain. "You were right," he said without preamble, stepping inside and removing his hat. Water cascaded from the brim. Something's happening at the copper mine. Wagons moving in and out all night, men with military rifles standing guard. This ain't no simple mining operation. Catherine poured him a coffee, noting how his hand strayed unconsciously to the gun on his hip, a habit shared by those who'd lived too long with danger. Tell me about the wagons. Army surplus by the look of them, but with fresh paint covering any markings. They're moving something heavy too. It takes 4 horses to pull each one. And here's the strange part. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. They're not following the main road. They're using old Indian trails, keeping to the shadows like they're hiding something. Maria added a plate of food in front of Michael. But hiding what? The survey team. Catherine's mind worked through possibilities, connecting pieces of a puzzle she'd seen before in other territories. They're not just mapping mining claims, are they? Michael shook his head, speaking between bites. Been watching them. They spend more time taking soil samples than measuring ore yields, and they're really interested in certain pieces of land, ones that just happen to keep having accidents until the owners sell. Another flash of lightning illuminated the room, and Catherine caught Michael studying her with the shrewd gaze that had made him legendary among Texas lawmen. She'd worked with him before in another life, when they'd brought down the Cortez gang along the border. He knew what she'd been, what she was capable of, but he'd respected her desire to disappear after that last bloody job in Virginia City. There's something else, he said finally, pushing his empty plate away. Remember that mining engineer who passed away last month? The one asking questions about mineral rights? Catherine nodded. The man had spent 3 days in her saloon, drinking little but watching everything. Found him yesterday, 30 miles south. Michael's voice dropped lower. Someone made it look like a robbery gone wrong, but I know professional work when I see it. Before he died, he managed to hide something in his boot, geological surveys of the whole territory. He paused, making sure he had her full attention. And Catherine, there's silver more than anyone suspected, whole veins of it just waiting to be discovered by whoever owns the right pieces of land. The pieces clicked into place. The mining company wasn't just buying land, they were systematically acquiring every property that might contain silver deposits. The survey team's soil samples, the mysterious wagons, the strategic pressure on certain landowners. It was all part of a carefully orchestrated plan. Sullivan knows, Catherine said softly. He's using the mining company as cover to grab every valuable piece of land in the territory before anyone realizes what's really here. Maria crossed herself. Dios mío. The Delgado Ranch, the Bennett place. They all sit along those survey lines. And anyone who figures it out has an unfortunate accident, Michael finished grimly. Question is, what are you going to do about it? Those were the legends worth keeping. Those were the stories that would be told in saloons and around campfires for years to come. Not just about Swift Hand's speed with a gun, but about how she'd brought justice to Shadow Creek without taking a single life, and if trouble comes again, well, her Colts would be ready. Because some legends never die. They just waited behind a bar, serving whiskey with a smile, ready to remind the world that justice still had a place in the changing West. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Clayton broke next, throwing down his weapon and raising his hands. Don't shoot, I surrender! Coward. Sullivan's voice carried notes of madness now. After everything I paid you. Catherine kept advancing, senses alert for any trap. It's finished. Colonel, Thompson's men will be here any minute. There's no escape. There's always escape, Sullivan's laugh echoed strangely. You think this is just mine? This tunnel connects to a whole network, miles of passages leading all the way to the border. I've got supplies cached, horses waiting. You'll never catch me. Maybe not, Catherine admitted, but you'll spend the rest of your life running. Every lawman in 3 territories will know your face. Every town will be closed to you. Is that really what you want?" "What do I want?" Sullivan stepped into view, his fine suit covered in mud, his carefully groomed appearance ruined by the storm. "What I want is to put a bullet through that legend of yours. Let's see how fast Swift Hand really is." Time slowed as Sullivan went for his gun. Catherine saw it all with crystal clarity. The telltale muscle tension, the slight shift of weight, the desperate gamble of a man who'd lost everything except his pride. Her first shot took his gun before it cleared leather. Her second removed his backup piece from his waistcoat. Her third sent his hidden derringer spinning away into the mine shaft. 3 shots, faster than seemed humanly possible, each striking with surgical precision to disarm without killing. Sullivan stared at his empty hands in disbelief. "How?" "Because legends aren't born from killing, Colonel," Catherine said quietly. "They're born from choices. Every time you face an enemy, you choose justice or vengeance, mercy or murder. I made my choice a long time ago." Swift Hand. Thompson's voice carried through the storm as he and his men arrived. "We've got the area surrounded." "It's done," Catherine called back. 3 prisoners for you, Marshal. And I expect you'll find some interesting documents in that mine. Papers Sullivan thought might save him if everything else failed. As federal agents moved in to secure the prisoners, Catherine holstered her Colts. The storm was beginning to pass, the first hints of dawn touching the eastern sky. It had been a long night, one that had finally ended the corruption that had plagued Shadow Creek. Sullivan's documents would expose the entire syndicate, bringing down land thieves and crooked officials across 3 territories. "What now?" Maria asked, appearing beside her friend. "Will you stay?" Catherine looked out over the town below, thinking about choices and consequences. She'd come to Shadow Creek seeking justice for Tom Bennett's murder, but she'd found something more. A community worth fighting for, people worth protecting. "You know," she said finally, "I think the Silver Dollar could use some improvements. Maybe expand the kitchen, add a proper dining room. If you're interested in becoming a partner." Maria's smile was answer enough. Behind them, the sun rose on a new day in Shadow Creek, one where justice wasn't just a word in a law book, but a living thing, as real as the legend of Swift Hand Reynolds. Sometimes, Catherine reflected, watching Thompson lead Sullivan away, the most powerful legends weren't about how fast you could draw or how straight you could shoot. They were about the choices you made when it mattered most, choosing right over easy, justice over vengeance, and mercy over revenge. Catherine burst from cover, her Colt speaking with precision as she ran. 2 of Sullivan's ambushers went down, clutching wounded arms and legs. She never killed when wounding would serve, a policy that had saved more lives than she could count. Through the rain and gun smoke, she caught glimpses of movement, figures rushing from the house toward the stables. Sullivan would have horses ready, fast ones chosen for just this kind of emergency. "Maria!" she called out, spotting her friend near the kitchen door. "How many got past you?" "3, the cook replied, reloading her own gun. "Sullivan, Clayton, and Riley." They had the key to the wine cellar gate, of course. The wine cellar would connect to the tunnel. Sullivan had probably planned this escape route when he built the house. Lightning flashed as Catherine reached the stable yard. Rain hammered the ground, turning the space into a maze of mud and shadows. Perfect cover for men who knew the terrain. Bullet whined past her ear, Riley taking a snapshot from behind a rain barrel. Catherine returned fire, her bullet splintering his cover and forcing him back. She couldn't afford to get pinned down in a gun battle. Every second gave Sullivan more lead time. "They're heading for the back trail," Sarah called from her position. 3 riders moving fast." Catherine sprinted for the nearest horse, a big bay stallion already saddled. Someone had prepared it for a quick escape, which meant it was probably the fastest mount in the stable. She swung into the saddle just as Thompson and his men reached the stable yard. "Which way?" the marshal shouted. "The old silver mine trail," Catherine replied, wheeling her horse toward the back gate. "Sullivan's got one last card to play." The pieces clicked together in her mind as she spurred the bay into a gallop. Sullivan wasn't just running. He was heading for insurance he'd hidden away. The mine would have records, proof of his wider connections, maybe even evidence that could implicate people in Washington. Rain stung her face as she followed the trail, trusting her horse's sure-footedness in the treacherous conditions. Ahead, she caught glimpses of her quarry. 3 riders pushing their mounts hard through the storm. Lightning revealed the landscape in stark flashes, rocky slopes, sparse pine trees, and the dark mouth of the old silver mine looming ahead. The trail grew steeper, more dangerous. One wrong step could send a horse and rider plunging to their death, but Catherine Swift-Hand Reynolds hadn't earned her legend by playing it safe. She urged the bay forward, closing the gap. Sullivan's party had to slow for a particularly treacherous stretch, giving her the opportunity she needed. Her first shot knocked Clayton's hat off, causing the corrupt sheriff to instinctively duck. His horse shied, forcing Riley to veer wide or risk a collision. The momentary confusion was enough to break their formation. "It's over, Sullivan," she called out through the storm. "There's nowhere left to run." The colonel's response was a desperate shot over his shoulder, not even close to hitting her. His usual precision was gone, replaced by panic. They were approaching the mine entrance now. Catherine could see lights spilling out, lanterns already lit. Someone had been here recently, preparing for this possibility. Sullivan and his men pulled up at the mine's mouth, practically falling from their horses in their haste to reach the entrance. Catherine dismounted more carefully, keeping her Colts ready. "Don't be a fool, Colonel," she warned, moving forward cautiously. "Whatever you've hidden in there won't save you." "You understand nothing," Sullivan's voice echoed from the darkness. "I built this territory. Men like me made civilization possible. We did what needed to be done." "You murdered innocent people," Catherine replied, edging closer. "Stole their land, destroy their lives. That's not civilization. That's just greed wearing a fancy coat." A shot rang out, Riley trying to ambush her from the shadows. But Catherine had been ready, had read the signs in the scattered gravel. Her return fire sent the gunman sprawling, his beloved pearl-handled Remington clattering away into the darkness. Reed's gun cleared leather with impressive speed, but Catherine was already moving. Her first shot took his revolver before he could level it. Her second knocked his rifle from its saddle scabbard. Both bullets struck with surgical precision, disarming without drawing blood. The other rangers stared in shock as their captain's weapons went spinning into the mud. The speed of the draw, the impossible accuracy of the shots, realization dawned in their expressions as they recognized what they were seeing. "Swift-Hand," one of them whispered. "She's Swift-Hand Reynolds, the one they said never misses," another added, his rifle barrel dipping uncertainty. "That's right," Catherine confirmed, her Colt remaining rock-steady despite the rain. "And I'm telling you that your captain is working with men who murder families and blame it on Indians, men who'd start a war between territory and federal law just to cover their crimes. The question is, are you willing to draw on fellow lawmen to help them do it?" The Rangers exchanged glances, decades of frontier experience warring with military discipline. They were good men, most of them caught in a bad situation. Catherine had seen it before, honest lawmen following orders because that's what lawmen did, until someone forced them to confront what those orders really meant. "She's lying." Reed tried again, but his voice cracked. "Sullivan has proof that—" "Has proof of what, Captain?" Thompson called out. "That he's been paying you to look the other way while his men terrorize honest folks? That he promised you a piece of his operation once martial law let him seize every valuable property in the territory?" The marshal produced his own document. Another telegram from Sullivan's safe. "We've got it all, Reed. Names, dates, bank drafts, every crime, every bribe, every murder. The only question is whether you want to add starting a range war between lawmen to the list. Thunder crashed overhead as Reed's men looked to their captain with new eyes. They were frontier veterans, men who'd spent years upholding the law. The idea that their leader had sold that law to men like Sullivan struck at the heart of everything they believed in. "Orders, sir?" one of them asked, but his tone made it clear what answer he hoped to hear. Reed's face twisted with fury and fear as he realized his position was untenable. His men might follow him into a jurisdictional dispute, but they wouldn't help him cover up murder and corruption. Not now that they knew the truth. "Stand down," he said finally, slumping in his saddle. "Stand down," and the crack of a rifle shot cut through the storm. Catherine spun toward the sound, tracking its source to an upper window of Sullivan's house. Through the rain-streaked glass, she caught a glimpse of Riley's face, his pearl-handled Remington still smoking. Reed toppled from his saddle, a bullet meant for Catherine striking him instead. The captain had shifted position at the last second, perhaps reaching for a hidden weapon, perhaps simply moving to surrender. Either way, Sullivan's man had just turned a potential ally into a liability. "Rangers, cover!" Catherine shouted as more shots rang out from the house. Sullivan's final gambit was unfolding. If he couldn't use Reed to start a range war, he'd create one through blood and bullets. Chaos erupted as bullets rained from the house windows. The Rangers scattered for cover, their uncertainty forgotten. In the face of direct attack, Thompson's federal agents returned fire, forcing Riley and his men back from their shooting positions. "Sarah!" Catherine called out, ducking behind an overturned wagon. "Status!" "4 shooters in the upper windows," the scout reported from her rooftop position. "Riley's got men with hunting rifles trying to pin us down. They're buying time for something." Catherine's mind raced through possibilities as she assessed the situation. Sullivan's study had a hidden door. She'd glimpsed it during their earlier confrontation. If he'd planned this kind of last-ditch scenario... "Thompson," she shouted to the marshal. "The cellar. Check if there's a tunnel." Many frontier mansions had escape routes built during more dangerous times. Sullivan was too careful not to have prepared a back door. "On it!" Thompson gestured to his men. "Jenkins, Garcia, with me." But even as the agents moved to check the cellar entrance, new gunfire erupted from the kitchen wing. More of Sullivan's men had been hiding among the servants, waiting for this moment. "They're pushing for the stable yard," Two Rivers' voice carried over the storm. "At least 6 men, moving fast." "He'll try something," she said, checking her remaining ammunition. "Men like Sullivan don't accept defeat, they rewrite it." As if confirming her words, a new sound cut through the storm, horses approaching fast from the direction of town. Catherine's trained ear counted at least 6 riders, moving with military precision, despite the weather. "Company," Sarah's voice carried from the roof. "Armed men coming in from the east. Territory Rangers," Thompson identified them through his spyglass. "Must be the ones Sullivan was coordinating with earlier, the ones who brought that message. About federal agents." Catherine's mind raced through implications. "He's trying to muddy the waters, creating confusion about who has legitimate authority. If he can trigger a jurisdictional dispute between territory and federal law enforcement, it could buy him time to destroy evidence and establish his narrative," Thompson finished. "Clever bastard." "More than clever," Catherine corrected. "Watching the Rangers approach, he's playing a deeper game. Notice how they're riding spread out, weapons ready? They're not coming to investigate, they're coming to fight." Thunder rolled overhead as the Rangers drew closer. Their leader was a hard-faced man Catherine recognized from wanted posters, Captain Marcus Reed, rumored to be on multiple payrolls. "Besides the territories, Marshal Thompson," Reed called out, reining up at the compound's gate. "This is territory business. Stand your men down." "This is a federal investigation, Captain," Thompson replied evenly. "We have evidence of multiple capital crimes, including conspiracy to commit murder and—" "What you have," Reed cut him off, is no jurisdiction and a lot of explaining to do about why federal agents are interfering with legitimate territory law. Enforcement. Catherine studied the Rangers carefully. 6 men, all experienced, all carrying military-issue rifles in addition to their revolvers. More importantly, all positioned to provide covering fire for whatever Sullivan was planning inside. This doesn't end well, she told Thompson quietly. Reed's not here to negotiate. He's here to start a fight that'll let Sullivan slip away in. The confusion, the marshal nodded grimly. Notice that too. His men are too spread out for parley, and those rifles aren't just for show. One wrong move, and this turns into a bloodbath. Unless... Catherine's mind worked through possibilities. Reed's reputation may be questionable, but some of his men are solid. They follow him because he's their captain, not because they're corrupt. What are you thinking? That sometimes the best way to stop a fight is to make people question what they're really fighting for. Catherine stepped forward into the rain-swept space between federal agents and territory rangers. Captain Reed, before you start a war between lawmen, you might want to hear what your friend Sullivan's been plotting. Reed's face darkened. Stand aside, woman. This doesn't concern you. No? Catherine's voice carried across the compound. Then you don't want to know about Sullivan's plan to blame tomorrow's massacre on Apache raiders, about how he was going to use that lie to justify calling in federal troops, putting the territory under martial law. She saw uncertainty flicker across some of the Rangers' faces. Good, they might be following orders, but they weren't stupid. Or maybe, she continued, you'd be interested in the evidence we found in his safe, documents proving how he and the syndicate have been orchestrating land grabs across 3 territories. How they've been murdering honest ranchers and blaming it on Indians to stir up trouble. She's lying, Reed snapped. But Catherine caught the flash of fear in his eyes. He knew she was telling the truth, which meant he was deeper in Sullivan's schemes than she'd suspected. Am I? Catherine reached slowly into her dress pocket, producing a folded paper. This telegram was on Sullivan's desk. Instructions for how to divide territory contracts after martial law was declared. Your name's on it, Captain, right next to the price Sullivan paid for your loyalty. The gang leader's face twisted with fury as he reached for a hidden derringer, but Catherine had anticipated the move. Her 3rd shot sent the small gun flying before he could grip it properly. Her 4th caught his notched vest's buckle, the impact spinning him halfway around before he collapsed to his knees. That's 3 guns I've taken from you, Catherine noted calmly. Care to try for 4? Hawkins looked up at her, real fear finally replacing his arrogant certainty. This wasn't just skilled shooting, it was mastery beyond anything he'd ever encountered. Every shot precisely placed to disarm rather than kill, each bullet demonstrating not just ability, but choice. Why? He asked finally. Why not just kill me? Catherine's voice carried quiet authority as federal agents moved in to secure the fallen gang leader. Because justice isn't about killing Hawkins, it's about choices, about proving that right can triumph over might, that protection matters more than power. Thunder rolled across the compound as lightning continued to illuminate the scene. They say the legend of Swift Hand Reynolds had been born in violence, but it would be remembered for mercy. Sometimes the most powerful shots were the ones you chose not to take. But the night wasn't over yet. Even as agents led Hawkins away, Catherine turned her attention back to the main house where Sullivan and his conspirators waited. One more act remained in this frontier drama, and it would demand every skill and conviction she possessed. The storm was about to break over Shadow Creek, and with it would come a reckoning long overdue. The storm broke over Shadow Creek with biblical fury as Catherine approached the main house, rain hammering the compound's grounds like 1,000 angry fists. Behind her, federal agents secured Hawkins and his surviving men, while Sarah's shooters maintained their positions on the roof. But Catherine's focus remained on what lay ahead. Through the rain-streaked windows she could see movement in Sullivan's study. The colonel wasn't finished yet. Men like him always had one last card to play, one final scheme that could turn defeat into victory. The question was whether she'd figure it out in time. "Thompson!" she called out, spotting the marshal directing his men. "Status?" "Sullivan's still in his study with Riley and Clayton," he reported, rain dripping from his hat brim. "They've barricaded themselves in, but we've got every exit covered. No one's getting out without us knowing." Catherine studied the house's facade, noting details others might miss. "Any word from Two Rivers?" His people intercepted 3 riders trying to leave, all carrying sealed messages to Sullivan's contacts. Seems our friend the colonel was attempting to summon reinforcements. "More than that," Catherine said grimly. "He's trying to create a paper trail, establish his version of events before the truth gets out. How many men do you have inside?" 8 federal agents, plus Sarah's people covering the upper floors. "Maria's got the kitchen staff blocking the servants' passages. No one moves without us seeing it." Lightning flashed, illuminating the compound in stark relief. Through the windows, Catherine caught a glimpse of Sullivan pacing in his study, his usual composure replaced by barely controlled panic. Good. A frightened man made mistakes. Hawkins' stance was textbook perfect, his years of military training evident in every line of his body. Both revolvers remained rock steady in his hands, a feat few men could manage. The notched vest that had become his trademark seemed alive. In the occasional flashes of lightning from the approaching storm. "You know what they say about me in Texas?" he asked conversationally, though his eyes never stopped calculating angles and distances. "That I once took down 6 lawmen with 6 shots, all between heartbeats." Catherine watched him carefully, reading the subtle tells that telegraphed intention. "They say a lot of things about both of us, Hawkins. Most of them aren't true, but some are." His smile was cold as winter. "Like how Swift-Hand Reynolds never misses. How many notches on your guns now? 50? 100? "I don't keep count," Catherine replied evenly. "Never saw the point in measuring justice by the body count." Thunder rumbled closer as Hawkins shifted his weight slightly, testing her reactions. "Justice? Is that what you call it? Hunting men down like animals? Playing judge and executioner across 3 territories?" "Better than murdering innocent people for profit," Catherine countered, noting how his fingers tightened on the triggers at the accusation. "Better than killing families in their sleep because they wouldn't sell their land." Hawkins' laugh held no humor. "Progress demands sacrifice. The weak make way for the strong. That's nature's law." "No," Catherine said softly. "That's just what cruel men tell themselves to justify cruelty. Your brother used the same excuse before the end." Lightning flashed again, closer now, illuminating the scene in stark relief. Federal agents maintained their positions around the courtyard's perimeter, while Sarah's shooters kept the Gatling gun's position covered, but everyone's attention remained fixed on the 2 figures at the center of the approaching storm. "Maybe you're right," Hawkins admitted, his smile turning predatory. "Maybe some lines shouldn't be crossed, but we're well past that now, aren't we? The only question is how many I can take with me when I go." Catherine read his intent in the subtle shift of muscle and weight. He wasn't just planning to shoot her, he meant to spray bullets into the surrounding agents, creating maximum carnage. In his final moments, his legend would grow with each death, turning a corrupt killer into a dark hero who died fighting impossible odds. "That's the difference between us," Catherine said quietly. "You see people as targets, numbers to add to your reputation. I see them as lives worth protecting." "Protecting?" Hawkins' laugh was bitter. "Look around, Swift-Hand. The frontier's dying. Men like Sullivan, the syndicate, they're the future. Progress doesn't care about justice or right and wrong. It only cares about power." "You're wrong." Catherine's voice carried absolute conviction. "The frontier's changing, not dying. And it needs people willing to stand against men like you and Sullivan, people who remember what justice really means. Another flash of lightning, and Catherine saw the decision form in Hawkins' eyes. He was done talking, done playing the game of words and threats. His fingers began to tighten on both triggers as he prepared his final murderous act. Time slowed to a crawl as Catherine read his movement. Years of experience, countless gunfights and showdowns had taught her to see the subtle tells that preceded violence. Hawkins was fast, professionally trained, with a well-earned reputation for deadly accuracy, but reputation wasn't the same as legend. The gang leaders' guns began to move, starting their arc of destruction, but Catherine Swift Hand Reynolds hadn't earned her name through exaggeration. Her first shot took Hawkins' right-hand revolver before it could level, the bullet striking with surgical precision to disarm rather than kill. Her second shot mirrored the first, sending his left-hand weapon spinning into the darkness. Hawkins stared at his empty hands in disbelief as Catherine kept her Colt trained steadily on his chest. 2 shots, perfectly placed, faster than seemed, and humanly possible. The legend of Swift Hand Reynolds made real before dozens of witnesses. "That's impossible," he whispered. "Nobody's that fast." "Legends usually are," Catherine replied quietly. "Until they're not. Your choice now, Hawkins. Surrender and testify against Sullivan, or test whether the next shots find your guns or your heart." Catherine's words carried across the tense standoff. Another soldier following orders, or was that just business for the Black Hawk gang? The gang leader's laugh held no humor. Bennett was a fool, refused to sell, started asking questions about the syndicate's plans. Sullivan ordered him removed, so we arranged an accident. Simple business. His cold smile returned as he gestured to his men. "Just like you're about to be. Light her up." The Gatling gun's crew scrambled to obey, but Catherine had achieved her goal. The conversation had given her allies time to move into the final position. More importantly, it had drawn Hawkins into revealing truths that couldn't be taken back. "Chad, hear that, Thompson?" she called out clearly. "Including the confession about Bennett's murder," the U.S. Marshal's voice carried from the darkness. Hawkins' face twisted as he realized his tactical error. Federal agents emerged from concealment, weapons trained on his men. Sarah's shooters on the roof had clear lines of fire to the Gatling gun's position. Two Rivers people moved like shadows through the compound's grounds, cutting off escape routes. "It's over, Hawkins," Catherine said quietly. "Surrender now. Testify against Sullivan and the syndicate, and maybe you'll see daylight again someday." The gang leader's response was a savage smile. "Nothing's over while I've still got cards to play." He raised his voice to address his men. "Anyone who brings me Swift Hand's head gets double wages and a full pardon from Sullivan. Kill them all!" The night erupted into chaos as Hawkins' men made their choice. Some threw down their weapons, surrendering to the federal agents. Others opened fire, turning the compound's grounds into a storm of gunsmoke and lead. The Gatling gun's crew tried to swing the weapon around, but Sarah's shooters picked them off with precise shots that wounded rather than killed. Through it all, Catherine maintained her focus on Hawkins. The gang leader's eyes held the deadly calculation of a cornered predator as he assessed options and angles. His reputation with a gun wasn't just for show. He'd killed dozens of men in fair fights and countless more through ambush and treachery. "Just you and me now, Swift Hand," he said softly, shifting his stance to a gunfighter's position. "Time to see if the legend's real." Catherine watched him carefully, reading his intentions in subtle muscle movements and weight shifts. She'd seen that look before in the eyes of killers who decided that death was preferable to surrender. Hawkins meant to go out in a blaze of glory, taking as many people with him as possible. "Last chance," she offered, though she knew it was futile. Think about your choices. Hawkins's smile was terrifying in its certainty. Oh, I have, and I choose to send you to hell, just like I sent Bennett and all the others who stood against progress. Catherine felt time slow as she read his intent. Hawkins wasn't just planning to draw on her. He was going to spin and spray bullets into the federal agents behind him, trying to take as many lives as possible in his final moments. His reputation would grow into a dark legend, the killer who died fighting impossible odds. The smart play was to simply shoot him first, but that would make him a martyr to men like Sullivan, a symbol of resistance against law and order. Sometimes justice needed more than just a quick trigger finger. You know the funny thing about legends, Hawkins? Catherine's voice carried deadly calm as she made her decision. The real ones are earned one choice at a time. The gang leader's eyes narrowed, trying to read her intent. Around them, the sounds of battle began to fade as both sides realized something momentous was about to happen. Sometimes the most important shots were the ones that proved not just skill, but character. Catherine's swift hand Reynolds was about to remind everyone exactly how she'd earned her legend. Time seemed to crystallize in the compound's courtyard as Catherine faced Hawkins across drawn weapons. The chaos of battle had faded to distant thunder, both sides instinctively holding their fire as they recognized the historic moment unfolding before them. Two legends of the frontier preparing to write the final chapter of their shared story in gunsmoke and steel. Catherine checked her ammunition grimly. 4 shots left in one gun, 3 in the other, not enough to handle the remaining men and Hawkins while avoiding that machine gun. She needed another option. Through the chaos, she caught Sarah's signal from the rooftop. Her allies were in position, ready to act, but needed a distraction, something to draw attention away from their positions. Catherine closed her eyes briefly, considering choices and consequences. The smart play was to wait, to let her allies handle the situation. But that wasn't why she'd become Swift Hand Reynolds. "Hey, Hawkins!" she called out, letting her voice carry clearly. "Want to know what happened to your brother?" The Gatling gun's roar faltered. 3 years ago, Hawkins' younger brother had disappeared while running guns through Swift Hand's territory. His body was never found. "What did you say?" Hawkins' voice carried a deadly quiet. Catherine smiled coldly in the darkness. Sometimes the most dangerous weapon wasn't a gun at all. Sometimes it was the truth. "He died calling your name," she said softly, "begging Big Brother to save him. But you weren't there, were you? Too busy playing soldier with the Blackhawk gang to help your own blood." Hawkins's scream of rage was exactly what she'd been waiting for. As the gang leader charged her position, abandoning tactical sense for pure vengeance, Catherine made her move. Sometimes the most dangerous predator wasn't the one with the biggest gun. Sometimes it was the one who knew exactly where to strike. Hawkins' rage-filled charge transformed the tactical situation instantly. His men hesitated, caught between, following their leader and maintaining control of the Gatling gun. Catherine used that moment of uncertainty to her advantage, her movements precise and calculated as she emerged from cover. Her first shot caught Hawkins' hat, spinning it away into the darkness. The second bullet knocked his drawn revolver aside. Before he could level it, both shots were carefully placed warnings demonstrating her legendary accuracy while leaving him unharmed. Sometimes the most effective shots were the ones that proved what you could do rather than what you did. "You're lying," Hawkins snarled, pulling up short as he realized his tactical error. "My brother vanished in Texas. You couldn't have followed his trail to Mexico?" Catherine finished, keeping her voice steady as she maintained her position. "Tracked him through 3 states as he tried to escape what he'd done. Found him in that canyon outside Santa Fe, surrounded by the bodies of the settlers he'd murdered. Through her peripheral vision, she noted Sarah's shooters taking the final position on the roof. Thompson's agents were moving through the shadows, coordinating with Two Rivers people to surround the Gatling gun's position. but they needed more time. "You're just trying to distract me," Hawkins said, but doubt had crept into his voice. "Playing games while my men get that gun ready." He shouted to his crew, trying to regain control of the situation. "Swift Hand dies tonight." Catherine kept her Colts trained on Hawkins while addressing his men. "Your boss never told you about his brother, did he? About how James Hawkins murdered an entire family of settlers, including children, just to steal their wagon? About how he begged for mercy when justice finally caught up to him? She saw the uncertainty in the gun crew's movements. Even hardened killers had lines they wouldn't cross, and James Hawkins' reputation for bloodthirsty violence was well known among outlaws. "Shut up!" Hawkins' composure cracked further. "James wasn't like that. He was a soldier like me." "He was a murderer," Catherine corrected coldly. "And you knew it. That's why you never looked too hard for him, never really tried to find out what happened. Because deep down you knew what your brother had become." Hawkins' hands shook with rage as he drew a second revolver. "I'll kill you for this, like we killed Tom Bennett." A burst of gunfire from the main house drew her attention. Through the windows, she glimpsed Thompson's agents securing Sullivan's study, ensuring the colonel and his conspirators couldn't destroy evidence or summon reinforcements. But that brief distraction had cost her precious seconds. "Company!" one of Hawkins' men shouted, spotting movement in the darkness. Catherine's heart froze as she recognized the figures stumbling into the Gatling gun's line of fire, Maria and a group of kitchen staff trying to lead surviving party. "Guests to safety." Hawkins' cold laugh carried across the grounds as his men swung the weapon toward the helpless group. "Perfect," the gang leader drawled. "Let's show everyone what happens when they cross the Black Hawk gang." Catherine had less than a second to make her decision. Her position offered a clear shot at Hawkins, but taking it would expose her to his men. The smart play was to wait, to let events unfold while maintaining tactical advantage. But sometimes, she reflected, bringing her Colts up smoothly, being smart wasn't the same as being right. Her first shots caught the Gatling gun's crew. Completely by surprise, 2 men went down instantly, her bullets finding shoulders and gun arms with surgical precision. She never killed when wounding would serve, another reason they called her Swift Hand. "Maria, run!" she shouted, already moving to a new position as return fire shattered her previous cover. The kitchen staff and guests scattered, using the confusion to reach safety. Hawkins' reaction was immediate and professional. "There she is. Forget the runners. Swift Hand's our target now." Catherine rolled behind a stone fountain as bullets churned the ground around her. The gang leader had recognized her shooting style instantly, adjusting his tactics accordingly. His remaining men spread out in a standard cavalry pattern, trying to flank her position while keeping up steady fire. "You've gotten soft, Swift Hand," Hawkins called out, trying to draw her attention. "Time was. You'd have killed those men instead of just winging them." "Lost your edge hiding behind that bar?" Catherine ignored the taunt, focusing on the tactical situation. 3 men moving left, 2 right, while Hawkins himself stayed close to the Gatling gun. If they got that weapon fully operational, a flash of movement caught her eye. Sarah's shooters taking positions on the compound's roof. They could eliminate the gun crew easily, but not without exposing themselves to Hawkins' experienced men. Catherine needed to create an opening. She fired, twice from behind the fountain, forcing the flanking gunman to dive for cover. In the same motion, she darted to new concealment behind a decorative wagon, noting positions and angles. Hawkins' men were good, maintaining proper fields of fire while working to surround her. "Almost disappointing," Hawkins continued, his voice carrying false concern. "Here I was, hoping for a proper challenge from the legendary Swift Hand Reynolds. Instead I find a soft-hearted saloon keeper who can't even—" His words cut off as Catherine's shot knocked the cigar from his lips, the bullet passing so close it left powder burns on his cheek. "You were saying?" she called out, allowing herself a small smile at his startled curse. Hawkins' response was instant and vicious. "Light her up!" he ordered, gesturing toward the Gatling gun. His men scrambled to obey, swinging the weapon toward Catherine's position. She was already moving. But the wagon's bulk limited her options. In seconds, the Gatling would turn her cover into splinters along with anything else in its firing arc. Sometimes, she reflected grimly, the only way out was through. Catherine burst from cover, her Colts speaking with deadly precision. One gun handled the flanking men, picking them off with carefully placed wounds, while the other kept Hawkins himself pinned down. But she couldn't stop them all from reaching the Gatling gun. The weapon's first burst caught her diving for new cover, splinters from shattered wood stinging her face. She rolled behind a stone planter as the night erupted with the gun's distinctive roar, its multiple barrels throwing a storm of lead in her direction. "Nowhere left to run, Swift Hand," Hawkins shouted over the gun's thunder. "Time to find out if legends can bleed." "It's over, Colonel," Catherine said. "Your pet sheriff is exposed. Riley's shooting arm will never draw fast again, and your perfect plan—" She gestured toward the sound of fighting. "Well, it's falling apart rather spectacularly." Sullivan's composure cracked completely. "Do you think this changes anything? I still have the governor out there, still have the documents ready to sign. One signature and everything becomes legal, no matter what evidence you have." "About that," Catherine smiled, "Maria has been serving the governor very special coffee all evening. He won't be signing anything tonight, or remembering much about this celebration for that matter." The colonel's face twisted with fury, his hand darting toward his coat, proving that even sophisticated men could die from terminal stupidity. Catherine's shot took him high in the shoulder, spinning him against the desk. "4 shots, she noted calmly. "Still want to test my aim?" The study door burst open as Thompson charged in, gun ready. Behind him, Catherine glimpsed federal agents, engaging Sullivan's men throughout the house. The carefully planned massacre had become a very different kind of battle. "Catherine!" Thompson's voice carried urgency. "Hawkins' men are moving the Gatling gun. They're going to sweep the grounds, kill everyone they can't control." Catherine's mind raced through options. The Black Hawk gang was cornered, which made them even more dangerous. Hawkins would want revenge for his ruined operation, and that machine gun could create a bloodbath. "Watch these 3, she ordered. "Thompson, don't let them near any weapons or writing materials, especially telegrams. Where are you going?" Catherine checked her remaining ammunition, mind already planning her route to the Gatling gun's position. "To remind Hawkins why they called me Swift Hand. Sometimes a legend needs refreshing." As she moved toward the door, Clayton called out desperately, "You can't win, Reynolds. The territory is changing. No place left for people like you." Catherine paused, looking back at the corrupt sheriff who'd betrayed his badge and everything it stood for. "You're right about one thing," she said softly. "The territory is changing. That's why it needs someone to remind it what justice really means." She slipped into the chaos beyond the study, leaving Thompson to secure the prisoners. Outside, gunfire and explosions painted the night with deadly light. Hawkins's men were moving the Gatling gun into position, preparing to write their own version of history in blood. But Catherine Swift Hand Reynolds had spent years teaching outlaws and corrupt officials alike that some legends were more than just stories. Some legends carried Colts, moved like shadows, and never ever missed their mark. Catherine moved through the chaos of Sullivan's compound like a ghost, years of experience guiding her steps through shadow and gunsmoke. The night had erupted into warfare, Thompson's federal agents engaging Black Hawk gunmen across the grounds, while panicked party guests fled in all directions. Through the darkness, she tracked the Gatling gun's movement by sound, the heavy wheels, crushing gravel, men cursing as they muscled the weapon into position. From her concealment behind a decorative planter, she studied the situation. Hawkins had chosen his position well, setting up the gun on a raised portion of the grounds that commanded multiple firing lanes. His men worked with military precision to establish fields of fire that could sweep the entire gathering. Their intent was clear. If they couldn't control the situation, they'd turn the celebration into a massacre. "Get that gun set up!" Hawkins' voice carried over the chaos, his usual drawl replaced by sharp command. "Anyone tries to leave, cut them down. No witnesses." Catherine counted 8 men with the gun crew, all experienced killers. Hawkins himself stood slightly apart, the moonlight gleaming off his notched vest as he directed the operation. Her trained eye caught subtle details, the way his hand never strayed far from his weapon, how he positioned himself to watch multiple approaches. He was expecting trouble. Sullivan moved from behind his desk, satisfaction evident in his cultured voice. "The sheriff understands what you never could, my dear. Progress isn't about justice or right and wrong. It's about power. Who has it? Who knows how to use it?" Through the study windows, Catherine caught glimpses of movement in the darkening grounds. Sullivan's men were taking positions, preparing for whatever signal would start their planned massacre. In the main hall, the governor's voice droned on, unaware he was participating in his own execution. "Your guns, Swift Hand," Riley prompted, his pearl-handled Remington steady. Slowly. Catherine's trained senses caught subtle details. Riley's stance slightly off balance, Clayton's breathing too rapid for a professional, Sullivan's careful distance from potential danger. They feared her reputation, feared what Swift Hand Reynolds might do, even in this seemingly hopeless situation. They were right to be afraid. Several things happened simultaneously. A massive explosion rocked the compound's outer buildings, Thompson's signal that federal reinforcements had arrived. The blast's concussion rattled the study's windows, causing Clayton to instinctively flinch. In that split second, Catherine moved. Her left elbow struck backward with devastating precision, finding Clayton's solar plexus. As the corrupt sheriff doubled over, Catherine dropped and rolled, bullets from Riley's Remington passing through where she'd been standing. Her own weapon seemed to materialize in her hands as she came up firing. Her first shot caught Riley's gun arm, sending the pearl-handled revolver spinning. Her second removed Clayton's dropped weapon from play, sparks flying as the bullet sent it skittering across the floor. Both shots had happened faster than seemed humanly possible, demonstrating why they called her Swift Hand. Sullivan lunged for a hidden derringer in his desk, but Catherine's third shot splintered the wood near his reaching hand. "I wouldn't," she advised coldly. "I've got 5 more bullets, Colonel. Care to guess where they'll go?" Outside, more explosions joined the chaos. 2 Rivers people had triggered the diversions, drawing Sullivan's men away from their positions. Through the window, Catherine saw the Gatling gun's crew rushing to respond to phantom attacks. "You've failed," Sullivan snarled, real fear finally cracking his perfect composure. "My men are still out there. 1 shot, and they'll come running." "Let them come," Catherine replied. "Thompson's federal agents have the compound surrounded. Sarah's shooters control the high ground, and 2 Rivers people," she smiled coldly. "Well, let's just say your reinforcements won't be arriving." Clayton groaned from his position on the floor. "You don't understand what you're doing. The territory needs this, needs order, progress, order bought with blood." Catherine's voice carried deadly quiet. "Progress built on murdered ranchers and stolen land. That's not order, Sheriff. That's just corruption wearing a badge." Riley's uninjured hand twitched toward a hidden backup gun, but Catherine's shot destroyed the floorboard by his feet. 5 shots left now, she noted, and my reputation says I never miss. Want to test that reputation? Sullivan's cultured laugh held an edge of desperation. "You can't kill us all, Swift Hand, not without consequences. I have friends in high places, connections that reach all the way to Washington. 1 telegram and you mean these telegrams?" Catherine used her gun to indicate the safe behind his desk. "The ones detailing your real plans, your connections to the syndicate, the evidence about Tom Bennett's murder?" The colonel's face went pale. How did you know the combination? Simple. Chen's ledger had an interesting entry, a payment to your safe's manufacturer. Amazing what people will reveal for the right price. More. Explosions rocked the compound. Through the walls came the sound of gunfire as Thompson's agents engaged the Black Hawk gang. The carefully orchestrated celebration was dissolving into chaos. The study door opened to reveal Sullivan himself waiting inside, the colonel's perfect composure showing its first crack, a slight flush of anger beneath his customary calm. "Miss Reynolds," he said as Riley closed the door behind them. "Or should. I say, swift hand." Catherine's heart jumped, but she kept her expression neutral. "I'm afraid I don't understand." Sullivan removed a telegram from his desk. Finally got a response from the Arizona Territory. Fascinating description of a legendary gunfighter who disappeared 3 years ago. The timing of your arrival in Shadow Creek is remarkably convenient. Many people travel west seeking new beginnings, Catherine replied carefully, noting Riley's position near the door, the way Sullivan stood behind his desk. Indeed, Sullivan's smile was cold. Though most don't bring such interesting histories with them. Tell me, did you really think we wouldn't discover who you are, that your pathetic plan to disrupt tonight's operation would succeed? The only disruption I see is your own, Colonel. Something in that rider's message has you worried. Perhaps news about certain federal investigations. Sullivan's composure cracked further. Riley, search her thoroughly. The gunman moved forward, but Catherine was already in motion. Years of practice made the draw smooth as silk, her hidden Colt seeming to materialize in her hands. Riley froze, his own weapon only half cleared from its holster. "I wouldn't," Catherine said softly. "You're good, Riley, but you're not Swift-Hand good. Ask around. I earned that name one funeral at a time." Sullivan's laugh held genuine amusement. "Impressive. The legendary Swift-Hand Reynolds rose from retirement to play hero. But surely you realize it changes nothing. My men are everywhere. One shot and your perfect plan falls apart," Catherine finished. "The governor signing documents while gunfire erupts. Harder to hide than a few accidents and disappeared witnesses. You think that matters now?" Sullivan's voice hardened. "That rider brought word. Federal agents are approaching the territory. Your friend Thompson has been busy, it seems, which means our timetable has accelerated. The governor signs tonight, one way or another." He gestured to Riley. "And afterwards, the Black Hawk gang ensures no witnesses remain to complicate matters." "You'll never get away with killing a U.S. Marshal," Catherine warned. "The government won't stop until they find evidence of a tragic massacre by Apache raiders," Sullivan cut in. "The territory in chaos, the governor sadly among the victims. A perfect excuse for federal intervention, martial law, and emergency. Powers granted to cooperative local authorities." Catherine's mind raced. Sullivan wasn't just planning to eliminate witnesses. He was orchestrating a coup, using manufactured violence to seize control of the entire territory. "Why tell me this?" she asked, though she suspected the answer. "Because, my dear, you won't be leaving this room alive to share it," Sullivan smiled. "Riley?" The study's hidden door opened behind Catherine. She sensed movement, but couldn't turn without taking her eyes off Riley's deadly hands. A familiar voice froze her blood. "Drop them, Swift-Hand," Sheriff Clayton said coldly, his revolver pressed against her back. "Sometimes the law has to choose the winning side." Time seemed to freeze in Sullivan's study as Catherine felt Clayton's revolver press against her spine. The sheriff's betrayal shouldn't have surprised her. She'd seen the signs of his corruption, but the cold steel against her back still felt like a personal failure. "I'm disappointed, Sheriff," she said quietly, mind racing through options. "I thought you were better than this." "Better than what?" Clayton's laugh was bitter. "Better than being on the winning side? The territory is changing, Swift-Hand. Smart folks change with it." Catherine's hand brushed the hidden Colt beneath her skirts. "Neither did I, Marshal, neither did I." The celebration continued its carefully choreographed dance, but Catherine sensed the underlying tension. Sullivan's gunmen were too alert, too focused for mere security. They were waiting for something. Through the window, she caught a glimpse of Hawkins directing more men into position near the Gatling gun. The Black Hawk gang was preparing for war while their victims danced and chatted, unaware of their planned fate. The governor mounted the main staircase, preparing to address the gathered crowd. Sullivan moved to join him, every inch the gracious host, but Catherine saw his slight gesture to Riley, the way the gunman strayed toward his pearl-handled Remington. The dance was indeed beginning, but not the one Sullivan had planned. Sometimes, Catherine reflected, watching the scene unfold, the most dangerous predator wasn't the one making obvious threats. Sometimes it was the one who knew how to wait for the perfect moment to strike, and Catherine Swift-Hand Reynolds had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. "Ladies and gentlemen," the governor's voice carried across the gathered crowd as he extolled the virtues of progress and civilization. Catherine moved carefully through the elegantly dressed guests, noting how Sullivan's men had taken strategic positions around the room's perimeter. Through the window, she caught glimpses of more armed figures moving through the darkening grounds. "That the future belongs to men of vision," the governor proclaimed, gesturing expansively. "Men who understand that progress requires bold action, decisive leadership. Men like William Sullivan, whose tireless efforts will transform this territory." Catherine's attention focused on Riley, who had positioned himself near the study door. The gunman's hand never strayed far from his Remington, his eyes constantly scanning the crowd. Something about his stance bothered her, tension that went beyond normal security concerns. Thompson appeared at her elbow, maintaining his role as escort while whispering urgently. "Ryder just came in fast from town. Hawkins took the message. Straight to Sullivan. Something's got them spooked." Catherine watched Sullivan's face carefully as Hawkins spoke to him in hushed tones. The syndicate man's expression remained pleasant, but she caught the subtle tightening around his eyes, the slight tension in his shoulders. "The governor's speech is almost finished," she murmured. "Whatever they're planning, it's happening soon." "Where's Sarah?" "In position with her shooters. Two Rivers people have the escape routes covered, but Thompson—" She hesitated. "That rider who brought the message, he was wearing a badge." The marshal's eyes narrowed as Catherine's mind raced through implications. A law officer bringing urgent news that disturbed Sullivan's carefully laid plans meant only one thing. "Ladies and gentlemen," the governor announced, "it gives me great pleasure to begin the signing ceremony that will ensure this territory's a prosperous future." Sullivan moved to join him at the signing table, producing an elaborate document case, but Catherine saw him gesture subtly to Riley, who immediately began moving through the crowd toward her. "Marshal Thompson," Riley's voice carried false courtesy, "a situation has arisen in town requiring your immediate attention. I'm sure Miss Reynolds won't mind if I escort her for the remainder of the evening." Thompson hesitated, playing his role perfectly. "Official business can wait. The governor's ceremony—" "I'm afraid it can't wait, Marshal." Hawkins appeared behind them, his hand resting openly on his notched vest. "Unless you'd prefer we discuss certain telegrams that arrived today. Interesting reading about some unsolved matters back east." Catherine touched Thompson's arm gently. "It's all right, Marshal. I'm sure Mr. Riley will be a perfect gentleman." Thompson let himself be led away, but not before whispering, 10 minutes. Riley's grip was steel beneath his white-gloved hand as he guided Catherine toward Sullivan's study. "The Colonel wishes to conclude your business discussion now, Miss Reynolds. He's most eager to examine what you have to show him." As Thompson guided the buggy forward, Catherine noted more details. Sullivan's men had positioned themselves strategically, covering approaches, watching specific guests, maintaining clear fields of fire despite the growing crowd. These weren't ordinary gunmen playing dress-up. They were professionals preparing for serious violence. The governor's train just arrived, Thompson reported, helping Catherine down from the buggy. Private Railspur makes quite a statement. Everything about tonight is calculated to impress, Catherine agreed, watching Sullivan personally greet the territorial governor and his entourage. Show of power, demonstration of influence, perfect cover for what's really planned. They moved through the growing crowd, exchanging pleasantries with other guests. Catherine recognized faces from Chen's ledger. Wealthy landowners who'd refused to sell, newspaper editors who'd asked too many questions, judges who couldn't be bought. All gathered in one place, just as Sullivan planned. Riley intercepted them at the main house entrance, his pearl-handled Remington visible beneath his formal jacket. "Miss Reynolds, Marshal Thompson, I'm afraid we're checking all weapons at the door. Sullivan's orders. Safety first, you understand." "Of course." Thompson handed over his gun belt smoothly, though Catherine noted he kept his backup piece concealed. "Though I hope you'll make an exception for a U.S. Marshal's spare. Never know when duty might call." Riley's eyes narrowed, but he couldn't openly refuse a federal lawman's request without raising questions. "Just remember, Marshal, this is a peaceful celebration. Hate for anything to disturb the governor's big moment." Catherine surrendered, a small derringer from her reticule, watching Riley's satisfied smile. He never thought to check for the matched Colts concealed beneath her dress's clever design. After all, no lady would wear such weapons to a formal affair. Inside, the main house had been transformed. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over elegantly dressed guests, while a string quartet played sophisticated Eastern music. Servants circulated, with champagne and delicacies, their expressions carefully neutral, despite knowing what was coming. "Quite a gathering." Sullivan's cultured voice came from behind them. "So gratifying to see the territory's most prominent citizens coming together for progress." Catherine turned to face him, noting how his perfectly tailored suit couldn't quite conceal the gun he wore. "A remarkable achievement, Colonel, though I'm surprised you managed to arrange it all so quickly." "The syndicate has considerable resources," Sullivan replied smoothly. "When opportunity presents itself, one must be prepared to act decisively. Wouldn't you agree, Miss Reynolds?" The double meaning hung in the air between them. Through the crowd, Catherine spotted Maria among the serving. "Staff!" The cook's slight nod confirming their people were in position. "Speaking of decisive action," Sullivan continued, "I don't believe you've given me your answer regarding our business proposition. The deadline approaches rather quickly." "Actually, Colonel, I've been meaning to discuss that with you privately. Perhaps we could speak in your study." Sullivan's eyes gleamed with triumph, exactly as Catherine had anticipated. He thought she was finally surrendering to pressure, ready to sell the saloon and abandon her resistance. "Of course, my dear, though I'm afraid it will have to wait until after the governor's speech. Can't disappoint our honored guest, after all." Catherine smiled, allowing him to believe he'd won. "I look forward to it, Colonel. I have something very special to show you." As Sullivan moved away to greet other guests, Thompson leaned close. "Sarah's people are in position. Two Rivers reports the outer patrol patterns are established. Everything's ready." "Good," Catherine replied softly, "because I suspect the governor's speech will be the signal. When Sullivan springs his trap, we spring ours. Just be careful." "In that study," Thompson warned, "Sullivan didn't get where he is by being careless." "But why did you really come here?" Maria asked softly. "You knew Bennett before, didn't you?" "He served with my father in the war," Catherine replied, moving to the window. "When he wrote to me about his suspicions, asked for my help investigating the syndicate, I promised to come, but I arrived too late to save him." Her hand tightened on the reassembled Colt. "I've spent 3 years tracking the men who murdered my father, following leads, gathering evidence, watching them destroy lives across 3 territories. Tomorrow night it finally ends. Dios mio, Maria whispered. Then this isn't just about justice, it's personal. Justice is always personal to someone. Catherine began reassembling her second Colt. But revenge is a luxury I can't afford. We do this right, by the law as much as possible. The evidence we gather has to be clean, undeniable. Sullivan and his whole operation have to fall in a way that can't be covered up or explained away. A commotion in the street drew their attention. Through the window, they watched as more Black Hawk riders thundered into town, their horses kicking up dust in the pre-dawn light. These men looked different from the earlier arrivals, harder, more professional. Gun hands who killed for money rather than any pretense of law or progress. They're not even trying to hide what they are anymore, Maria observed. They don't need to. By this time tomorrow, they'll either be heroes who help put down an Apache uprising, or there won't be anyone left alive to say otherwise. Catherine's voice was cold. Either way, Sullivan believes he's won already. That certainty is his weakness. She finished with her weapons, checking their actions one final time before concealing them in their hidden holsters. Everything was ready. The pieces were in position, the trap was set. Now came the waiting, the hardest part for someone used to direct action. Get some rest, she told Maria. Tomorrow will be long, and we'll need every advantage. After the cook left, Catherine remained at the window, watching Sullivan's men patrol the streets of what they considered their personal kingdom. Soon the sun would rise on what might be her last day in Shadow Creek, one way or another. The thought didn't frighten her as it once might have. She'd spent 3 years playing a role, hiding her true nature behind a carefully constructed facade of frontier hospitality. But tomorrow night, Swift and Reynolds would emerge from the shadows, and the Black Hawk gang would learn why her legend still inspired fear in those who remembered. Some ghosts, she reflected, watching another group of riders arrive, couldn't be bought or buried. Some legends had to be faced in the cold light of dawn with gunsmoke and justice as their only witnesses. Sunset painted Sullivan's ranch in shades of gold as carriages and riders approached the celebration. Catherine sat straight-backed in Thompson's borrowed buggy, every inch the proper lady in her green evening dress. The U.S. Marshal himself handled the reins, playing the role of escort with perfect authenticity. Guards at the main gate, Thompson muttered, noting the Black Hawk members checking each arrival. Riley's men were wearing their best clothes, but still armed. Hawkins is on the veranda personally watching every guest. Catherine maintained her serene expression while cataloguing details. The Gatling gun had been cleverly concealed behind decorative bunting, its barrel commanding the main approach. Armed men tried to blend with the festivities, their weapons hidden beneath formal attire. She counted at least 20 professional gun hands just in her initial scan. "Remember," Thompson said softly as they approached the gate, "if anything seems wrong, it already is," Catherine replied through her pleasant smile. "Just be ready when the time comes." Hawkins himself stepped forward to check their invitation, his notched vest incongruous with his formal attire. His eyes lingered, too long on Catherine, searching for any sign that the elegant lady before him was the same woman who'd helped Chen escape. "Miss Reynolds," he drawled, "you look absolutely enchanting this evening, though I must say that dress seems a mite restrictive, hard to move quickly in such fine fabric." "The price we pay for fashion, Mr. Hawkins," Catherine responded lightly, though her fingers brushed the hidden slit in her skirt. "Some things are worth a little discomfort." The gang leader's smile never reached his eyes. "Indeed they are. Please enjoy the celebration. Sullivan is so looking forward to your company tonight." Two Rivers spoke softly from the shadows. "Many will die tomorrow night." "Some deaths balance the scales," Catherine replied, thinking of the Johnsons, of Raphael, of all the others who'd fallen to Sullivan's ambition. "Sometimes justice demands blood." They spent the next hour refining details, coordinating signals, and planning for contingencies. Each person knew their role, understood the risks, By the time they finished, the first hints of dawn were touching the eastern sky. "Get some rest," Catherine told them. "Tomorrow night will test us all." As her allies departed, she moved to the window. Sullivan's men still patrolled the streets, projecting power and confidence. They thought they were the hunters, preparing to spring their perfect trap. They had numbers, position, and the power of corrupt law on their side. But Catherine, swift hand, Reynolds, had spent years learning that true strength wasn't about numbers. It was about precision, about choosing the perfect moment to strike, about being willing to risk everything for justice. Tomorrow night, she reflected, watching the stars fade, someone would die at Sullivan's celebration. The only question was, who would be left standing when the smoke cleared? As her companions left, Catherine began her own preparations. From a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards, she retrieved a small wooden box she hadn't opened since arriving in Shadow Creek. Inside, nestled in velvet, lay the tools that had helped build her legend, a gunsmith's kit containing specialized tools and spare parts for her matched Colts. Working with practiced precision, she field-stripped both weapons, cleaning and checking each component. These weren't ordinary revolvers. They'd been custom-made to her exact specifications by a master gunsmith in St. Louis. The barrels were slightly shortened for faster drawing, the action smoothed to near perfection, the triggers adjusted to hair-fine precision. As she worked, Catherine's mind drifted to the last time she'd used these guns in earnest, that bloody day in Virginia City when she'd finally walked away from violence. 5 members of the Burton gang had cornered a family of settlers, planning to murder them for their wagon and supplies. She'd intervened, taking down all 5 men with 5 shots. But the violence of it, the necessity of killing to prevent killing, had finally pushed her to seek a different path. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Enter," she called, recognizing Maria's pattern. The cook slipped inside, carrying a bundle of fabric. "I've modified the dress as you asked," she said, laying it out. "Hidden pockets here and here, reinforced seams to support the weight of the guns. The skirt's split for easier movement, but it won't show unless you need it to." Catherine examined the modifications with approval. Maria had once been a seamstress for a theater company in San Francisco. Her skills with a needle were as precise as Catherine's with a gun. Perfect. And the other item? Maria produced a small glass vial filled with dark liquid. "My grandmother's recipe. 2 drops in a drink will make a man sleep like the dead for hours. No taste, no smell. Good. If we can neutralize some of Sullivan's men without violence, all the better." Catherine began reassembling her first Colt, the parts clicking together with familiar precision. "Any word from Chen?" "Michael got him safely to the Cheyenne camp. 2 Rivers people will keep him hidden until this is over." Maria hesitated. "Catherine, Chen told me what he found about Tom Bennett's murder. About why they really killed him." Catherine's hands stilled on her weapon. "I suspected there was more to it than just his refusal to sell. Bennett was too smart, too careful to confront them directly unless he had something significant." According to Chen's ledger, Bennett discovered that Sullivan and the syndicate had been operating in Montana for years before they came here. They didn't just want his saloon, they needed it. Why? Because 10 years ago another saloon stood on that spot. There was a fire, a terrible one that killed 12 people. The investigation ruled it an accident, but Bennett found evidence. It was deliberate, part of an earlier land grab by the same people. He was going to expose everything, not just their current operations, but their entire history of violence and corruption. Catherine absorbed this information, her mind connecting new pieces of the puzzle. So they killed him and arranged for me to buy the saloon, never suspecting I might be more than I appeared. Their own arrogance blinded them. Two Rivers entered silently through the back door, moving like a shadow. "More riders are arriving," he reported. "Groups of 2 and 3, all heading for Sullivan's ranch. Professional gunmen by their gear and weapons. They're gathering for a war." Catherine studied the ranch's layout, which Maria had carefully sketched from memory. The main house sat on high ground, offering clear views in all directions. The new rail spur approached from the east, while the recently constructed bunkhouses and stables formed a defensive perimeter. The Gatling gun's position commanded the main approach. "How many men total?" she asked. "At least 70 now," Two Rivers replied. "More arriving hourly." Sullivan's placed his most trusted men in key positions, Riley commanding the house guard, Hawkins overseeing outer security. The new arrivals are being assigned to patrol zones, creating overlapping fields of fire. Thompson whistled softly. "That's a lot of gun hands." "Numbers don't matter if you strike the right point," Catherine said, tracing routes on the sketch. "Sullivan's planned this carefully, but he's made one crucial mistake. He's thinking like a military man, preparing for a frontal assault." Sarah caught her meaning. "While we attack from within." Catherine nodded. "The celebration gives us cover to get close. Sullivan's invited every major landowner, banker and official in the territory. Too many people for his men to track effectively, especially with everyone in formal dress. Which means weapons hidden under fancy clothes," Michael added, understanding, dawning in his eyes. "But how do we get past the initial security? They'll be checking guests thoroughly." Catherine smiled coldly. "Let me worry about that." She turned to Thompson. "Your men are in position," the marshal nodded. 12 experienced lawmen, all with scores to settle against the syndicate. They'll create a distraction here and here when the time comes. He pointed to locations on the sketch. "Make Sullivan's men focus outward instead of inward. Sarah? My shooters will cover these approaches." She indicated key positions. "When the shooting starts, no one leaves the ranch without our knowledge." "Two Rivers?" The tracker's face showed grim satisfaction. "My people know every trail and shadow. Sullivan's reinforcements will find their routes difficult." "Rosa?" Catherine turned to her friend. The cook confirmed, "The kitchen staff is ready. Many lost family to Sullivan's operations. When the time comes, they'll ensure the back doors are unlocked and the guards' coffee is special." "Which leaves the main piece," Catherine said, focusing on the heart of their plan. "Chen's ledger proves Sullivan's operation, but we need the rest. The land surveys, the evidence of murders, the records of payoffs, all locked in his study safe, which will be heavily guarded," Thompson warned. "Especially during the celebration." "Not as heavily as you'd think," Catherine countered. "Sullivan's arrogant. He believes his security is impenetrable, his plan perfect. He won't expect anyone to reach his inner sanctum, especially not the simple saloon owner he's been threatening." "And if something goes wrong?" Sarah asked quietly. "Then they learn why they called me Swift Hand. I didn't earn that name by missing." Catherine checked her hidden weapons again. "Anyone who brings me proof of Sullivan's crimes gets a full pardon from the territorial governor. Once we expose his corruption, that should motivate some of the kitchen staff to keep their eyes open." Thompson moved to examine Catherine's dress. "You'll be outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded by killers. Even for Swift Hand Reynolds, those aren't good odds." "That's exactly why it will work," Catherine replied. "Sullivan's men are professionals. They'll be watching for professional threats. Lawmen, soldiers, rival gunfighters. Not a woman in a fancy dress, while we keep them occupied outside," Michael understood. "But Catherine, if they realize who you really are, by then it will be too late." She studied her gathered allies, each a legend in their own right, each willing to risk everything to stop Sullivan's corruption. "The Black Hawk gang thinks they're the most dangerous force in the territory. Time to remind them that some legends are earned the hard way." "Guest list came through," Thompson confirmed. "Every major landowner in the territory's been invited, along with judges, bankers, newspaper editors, anyone who could expose their operation or resist it. And with that Gatling gun in place, they could... Emma trailed off as the saloon door opened again. This time it was Sarah Hawkins, looking travel-worn but alert. "Raiders hit the Johnson Ranch," she reported without preamble. 30 head of cattle stolen, buildings burned. Sam Johnson and his youngest tried to stop them, both dead. Catherine's hand tightened on the glass she was holding. The Johnsons had been good people, refusing to sell their prime grazing land to the syndicate. "Black Hawk Gang?" Thompson asked grimly. Sarah shook her head. "Apache raiders by all signs. Too perfect, though. Tracks laid just right, like they wanted us to believe it was Indians." "Sullivan's trying to spark an Indian war," Catherine realized. "Give the governor an excuse to call in federal troops, blame the violence on Apache raids instead of his own men." "There's more," Sarah continued. 2 Rivers scouts found fresh signs, large groups moving through the backcountry, all headed this way. Sullivan's calling in every gun hand and hired killers in 3 territories. They're offering double wages and bonuses for every troublemaker eliminated during tomorrow night's operation. Catherine moved to the window, watching Sullivan's men, continuing their search of the town. The pieces were falling into place: the Gatling gun, the private rail spur, the gathering of gunmen. Sullivan wasn't just planning to eliminate witnesses, he was preparing for war. "We need to warn people," Maria urged. "Tell them what's coming." "They'll never believe us without proof," Thompson replied. "And even with Chen's ledger, Sullivan's got too many officials in his pocket. By the time we could convince anyone with real authority, it would be too late." "So we handle it ourselves," Catherine finished. She turned from the window, her decision made. "Tonight." The others looked at her sharply. "The compound's heavily guarded," Sarah warned. "And with all these extra gunmen arriving..." "That works in our favor," Catherine said. "Sullivan's men will be focused on external threats, never expecting someone to walk right through the front door. Especially not someone who's already accepted their invitation to tomorrow's celebration." Understanding dawned in Thompson's eyes. "You're going to attend the party," Catherine smiled coldly. "A proper lady never refuses such a gracious invitation. Besides, I need to thank Sullivan personally for his hospitality this morning." "It's suicide," Maria protested. "They'll be watching you every moment." "Counting on it," Catherine replied. "Sometimes the best way to slip past a predator's defenses is to walk right into their den while they're watching the obvious threat." "No," Thompson finished, catching her meaning, "while we move the pieces into position." "And if anything goes wrong?" Sarah asked quietly. Catherine's hand brushed one of her hidden Colts. "Then they'll learn why they called me Swift Hand. One way or another, this ends tomorrow night." Night settled over Shadow Creek like a heavy blanket, bringing with it an uneasy quiet. Catherine stood in her saloon's back office, making final preparations for tomorrow's confrontation. Her formal dress for the governor's celebration hung. Nearby, a deep green creation that would allow freedom of movement while concealing her weapons. On the desk before her lay Chen's ledger, its pages revealing the full scope of Sullivan's operation. "The numbers don't lie," Michael said, studying the document's careful columns. "Every land grab, every accident, every bribed official, it's all here. Sullivan's been building this web for years." Catherine nodded, checking the action on her, matched Colts one final time before concealing them in specially modified holsters. "And tomorrow night it either becomes legal with the governor's signature or we stop them." Thompson finished from his position by the window. The U.S. Marshal had spent the last hour watching Sullivan's men patrol the streets, learning their patterns. "But we'll need perfect timing. Too soon and they'll have time to recover. Too late and the governor signs, making everything legal. After that, even with proof of their methods, the courts will take years to untangle it," Sarah added. She sat, cleaning her rifle, each movement precise and practiced. By then, Sullivan and the syndicate will own everything worth having in the territory. The saloon's bat-wing doors crashed open as Hawkins entered, followed by 4 of his men. Their boots left mud and dust on Catherine's clean floor as they spread out with practiced precision. The gang leader's notched vest seemed to catch the afternoon light menacingly. "Miss Reynolds," Hawkins' voice carried dangerous courtesy, "I trust you've heard about this morning's regrettable incident at Mr. Sullivan's ranch." Catherine continued wiping glasses, her movements unhurried. "Hard to miss all the excitement, though I'm surprised such important men are concerned with a simple cook's assistant stealing food." Hawkins' smile never reached his eyes. Interesting perspective, particularly since several witnesses describe this cook's assistant bearing a striking resemblance to a certain saloon owner before she changed clothes. "Many Mexican women look similar to those who don't know them well," Catherine replied evenly. "I was here all morning, as my customers can attest." "Of course you were." Hawkins moved closer, resting one hand casually on the bar. "Just like you, were here last night, not meeting with certain interested parties at an abandoned church. Tell me, Miss Reynolds, do you really think we don't watch every movement in this territory?" Catherine's mind raced, even as she maintained her calm demeanor. If they knew about the church meeting, why hadn't they moved against them already? Unless, "Rider coming," one of Hawkins' men called from the window. Through the dusty glass, Catherine saw a lone horseman approaching at a gallop. Even at a distance, she recognized Thompson's powerful build. The U.S. Marshal pulled up hard in front of the saloon, his arrival drawing attention from everyone on the street. Hawkins' men tensed, hands straying toward weapons. Thompson's reputation was well known, his presence changing the dynamic instantly. The marshal strode through the doors, seemingly oblivious to the hostile attention. His badge caught the sunlight, a bright point of legitimate authority in a town drowning in corruption. "Hawkins," Thompson acknowledged coldly, "your boys are interfering with a federal investigation. Clear them out." The gang leader's face darkened. "This is territorial business, Marshal. You have no jurisdiction here." "I have jurisdiction anywhere I find evidence of federal crimes," Thompson countered, producing an official-looking document. "Like interfering with U.S. mail delivery. Seems someone's been intercepting private correspondence all across the territory. The Treasury Department's mighty interested in that." Catherine watched the interplay carefully. Thompson was playing a dangerous game, but it was buying them precious time. Every moment Sullivan's men spent reacting to federal pressure was a moment they weren't searching for Chen or the ledger. Hawkins studied the warrant with barely concealed fury. "This is harassment. Sullivan will hear about this." "I'm counting on it," Thompson replied. "In fact, I'll be paying him a visit myself right after I finish searching every Black Hawk bunkhouse for evidence of mail tampering. Unless you'd prefer to discuss this with a federal judge in Denver." The gang leader's hand twitched near his gun, but even he wasn't ready to draw on a U.S. Marshal in broad daylight. Not yet, anyway. With a curt gesture, he summoned his men. "This isn't over," he told Thompson before turning to Catherine. "Sullivan's invitation to tomorrow night's celebration still stands, Miss Reynolds. I strongly suggest you attend. Formal dress, of course. Wouldn't want to disappoint the governor." After they left, Thompson moved to the bar. "They're watching the church," he said quietly. "Probably followed Chen's trail there after the escape. But they haven't moved against us. Why? Because Sullivan's smart," Thompson replied. "He knows we found something big, but not exactly what. Moving too soon could spoil his plans for tomorrow night." "Or he's preparing a trap," Maria suggested from the kitchen doorway. Catherine nodded slowly. "Chen's ledger proves it. The ceremony isn't just about making their land grabs legal. Sullivan's planning to eliminate everyone who might testify against the syndicate. Every honest rancher, every witness to their operation, all gathered in one place." "Get some rest," she told the others. Tomorrow we remind the territory that not all power comes from money and political connections. Sometimes it comes from being willing to stand up when others back down. As her companions made their preparations, Catherine stepped outside into the gathering dark. The stars were emerging bright and clear in the Montana sky. She thought about her past, about the events that had led her to become Swift Hand Reynolds. The quick-draw contests that had honed her skills, the outlaws who'd tested them, the battles that had forged her legend. She'd walked away from that life once, thinking to find peace in anonymity, but fate, it seemed, had other plans. Tomorrow, she would strap on her matched Colts openly, face Riley and Hawkins and all of Sullivan's killers. The Black Hawk gang was about to learn what every outlaw in 3 territories already knew. When Swift Hand Reynolds stood against injustice, the only smart choice was to run. The first hints of dawn were just touching the eastern sky when Catherine approached Sullivan's ranch. She'd traded her usual saloon wear for dark riding clothes, her matched Colts concealed but readily accessible. Through her spyglass, she studied the sprawling compound that served as the Black Hawk gang's base of operations. Noting guard positions and patrol patterns, Sullivan had chosen his location well. The main house sat on a rise offering clear views in all directions. New construction showed recent fortification. Additional stables for the gang's horses, bunkhouses for the men, and a reinforced building that Catherine suspected housed their armory. But it was the newest addition that drew her attention, a private rail spur being built with frantic haste, clearly meant to accommodate the governor's special train. "They've doubled the guard rotation since yesterday," Michael whispered, lying prone beside her in the pre-dawn gloom. 2 men at every approach, overlapping fields of fire. These aren't regular hired guns. They're using military tactics. Former cavalry by their riding style, Catherine observed, tracking a patrol's movement. Probably served together during the war. Makes them dangerous. "More than you know." Two Rivers' voice came softly from behind them, the tracker having approached. Silently despite the rocky terrain. Found fresh signs. At least 20 more riders arrived during the night, and they brought a Gatling gun. Catherine's jaw tightened. A Gatling gun changed everything. That kind of firepower could turn the coming confrontation into a massacre, if they weren't careful. "Show me." She followed Two Rivers to a better vantage point. The tracker pointed out fresh wagon tracks leading to the reinforced building. Through her spyglass, Catherine caught glimpses of men unloading heavy crates under Riley's direct supervision. "There's more," Two Rivers added grimly. "They're not just fortifying. They're preparing for something big. Found these by their camp." He produced several telegram strips carefully pieced together. Catherine read quickly, her expression darkening. The messages were in code, but she'd seen similar ones during her bounty hunting days. "They're calling in every gun hand they can find, offering double pay for anyone who can get here by tomorrow night." "Why?" Michael asked. "They already outnumber any likely opposition." "Because this isn't just about the governor's signing ceremony," Catherine realized. "Sullivan's planning to eliminate all potential resistance at once. The ceremony's just cover. He'll have every major landowner, every possible witness to their operation gathered in one place." Two Rivers nodded grimly. "The perfect trap." "We need to move now," Michael urged, "before they're fully prepared." As alarm bells rang across Sullivan's compound, Catherine watched Harrison's men tear apart Chen's store from her vantage point in the saloon. The Black Hawk gang moved with cold efficiency, systematically searching every corner, every floorboard, every possible hiding place. Riley supervised personally, his pearl-handled Remington ready for any resistance. They wouldn't find anything. Of course, Michael had already retrieved the hidden ledger during the confusion of Chen's escape, but their increasing frustration told its own story. The documents were even more damaging than Chen had suggested. "They're searching every business." "On this street," Maria reported from the kitchen doorway. Sheriff Clayton's with them, claiming it's an official investigation into stolen property. Catherine nodded, noting how the townspeople hurried past with downcast eyes, trying to avoid attention. Fear had taken deep root in Shadow Creek, but beneath that fear she sensed something else. A growing anger, a resistance waiting for someone to strike the first spark. "Swift hand," Thompson greeted her with a respectful nod. "Been a while since anyone's seen you in action. Thought you'd hung up your guns for good." "Some things are worth coming back for," Catherine replied, moving to examine the maps. They showed the territory in detail, with key locations marked: Sullivan's Ranch, the copper mine, planned mining sites, and suspected syndicate holdings. "Michael's filled us in," Sarah said, her voice carrying the soft accent of her Virginia upbringing. "This syndicate's been operating in my territory too. 3 ranchers killed in accidents last month alone. All had refused to sell their water rights." Two Rivers spoke from the shadows, his voice quiet but carrying authority. "My people have seen their wagons moving at night. They follow old trails, avoiding towns and regular patrol routes, always heavily guarded." Catherine studied her assembled. Allies, legends in their own right, each drawn here by Michael's urgent messages and their own encounters with the syndicate's growing power. "The governor arrives tomorrow night. Once he signs their documents, everything the syndicate's stolen becomes legally theirs, unless we stop them." "Won't be easy," Thompson growled. "The Black Hawk gang's no ordinary bunch of thugs. Ex-military, well-trained, well-equipped, and they fight smart." "They're not the only ones," Catherine replied, unrolling a detailed plan of Sullivan's Ranch. "I've been watching them, learning their patterns. Sullivan's hosting the signing ceremony and celebration dinner there. Everyone who matters in the territory will attend, the perfect chance to expose everything." "If we have proof," Sarah pointed out. "These types are good at covering their tracks." Catherine produced the documents Michael had discovered: land records, telegrams, banking transfers, everything showing how the syndicate had been operating. "But there's more." She paused, ensuring she had everyone's attention. "The missing mining engineer. Before they killed him, he mapped every silver deposit in the territory. Those maps are hidden in Sullivan's study, along with records of their other operations." Two Rivers moved from the shadows, examining the ranch plans with a tracker's eye. Heavy security, guards posted here, here, and here. Regular patrols, dogs, and the Black Hawk gang will have their best men protecting the governor. "That's where we come in," Michael said, entering through the back door. He'd been coordinating with his own network of contacts throughout the territory. "I've got 12 men we can trust, former rangers, honest lawmen pushed out by the syndicate. They'll create a diversion here." He pointed to the map. "Draw attention away from the main house while we go for the evidence." Catherine studied the plans, her mind working through tactical options. Thompson and Sarah take the front, making a show of serving official warrants. The Black Hawk gang will have to respond properly with the governor present. "My people can secure the perimeter," Two Rivers added. "Prevent any escape attempts." "Michael coordinates the diversion," Catherine continued, her finger tracing routes on the map. "And I go for Sullivan." "He'll head for his study when trouble starts," Thompson noted, "where he keeps his private safe with all the documentation. We need, including, I suspect, proof of who really killed Tom Bennett." Sarah examined her rifle's action, the click of metal emphasizing her words. "Sullivan's no fool. He'll have Hawkins and Riley close. They're fast, Swift hand. Real fast." "So I've heard," Catherine replied, her hand unconsciously touching one of her hidden Colts. "But there's a reason they called me Swift hand. I will never miss it." The others nodded, remembering the stories. Catherine Swift hand. Reynolds hadn't earned her reputation through exaggeration. Every tale about her shooting prowess had been proven true, often at the cost of some outlaw's life. "There's something else you should know," Michael added grimly. "My sources say Sullivan's bringing in more Black Hawk riders, nearly 30 of them, all experienced gun hands. They're turning his ranch into a fortress. Numbers don't matter, Two Rivers said softly. The coyote can defeat the wolf pack if it chooses its ground wisely. Catherine moved to the church's broken window, watching the last light fade from the sky. Tomorrow night, Sullivan's ranch would become a battlefield. The Black Hawk gang would have numbers, position, and the power of corrupt law on their side. But Catherine had something they lacked: allies who understood. The justice sometimes required standing against impossible odds. Being dealt with, the judge replied. Sheriff Clayton has arrest warrants prepared for any troublemakers. Once they're in custody, unfortunate accidents can be arranged. The Black Hawk gang has experience in such matters. Catherine felt cold fury rise in her chest. Matthews had been respected in Shadow Creek, seen as one of the few honest officials left. His betrayal cut deep. And the saloon owner. Sullivan's voice carried a note of concern. Something about her troubles me. The way she moves. The way she watches everything. My sources are still checking. By this time tomorrow it won't matter, Matthews assured him. Once the governor signs those documents, the syndicate's ownership becomes official territorial law. Anyone who objects will be dealing with more than just the Black Hawk gang. The voices moved away, heading toward the street. Catherine waited until their footsteps faded before turning to her companions. How long until the governor's train arrives? Tomorrow at sunset, Maria replied. They're planning some kind of signing ceremony at the territorial offices, then a celebration dinner at Sullivan's ranch. Catherine's mind worked through options. The syndicate had spent years building their web of corruption, placing their pieces carefully. But like any web, it had vulnerable points. Strike the right one, and the whole thing could unravel. Michael, she said finally, how many honest lawmen do you know within a day's ride? The former ranger smiled grimly. Enough to make Sullivan nervous, if that's what you're thinking. And I know others, Catherine added softly. People who owe Swift Hand Reynolds favors, people who remember what justice means in the territories. You're talking about taking on the Black Hawk gang, the territorial government, and the whole syndicate, Maria warned. They'll kill everyone who stands against them. Catherine moved to the window, watching Sullivan and Matthews stroll down the street like men who owned the world. In a way they did, or would, once the governor signed their papers, unless someone stopped them. Send the word out, she told Michael, but quietly. We'll need proof of everything. The corruption, the murders, the blackmail. When we move, it has to be with enough evidence to break their whole corrupt machine. And Sullivan, Maria asked. The Black Hawk gang? Michael added. Catherine's hand brushed one of her hidden Colts. Let me worry about them. It's time they learned why they called me Swift Hand. As she watched Sullivan disappear into his office, Catherine felt the weight of her past settling around her shoulders like a familiar coat. She'd walked away from violence once, tried to build a quieter life. But sometimes, she reflected, justice needed more than just law books and badges. Sometimes it needed someone willing to stand in the street and prove that not all legends were just stories told in saloons. Twilight painted the desert in shades of purple and gold as Catherine guided her horse along a narrow trail leading to an abandoned church 5 miles outside Shadow Creek. The old building stood silhouetted against the dying sun, its bell tower still reaching skyward despite years of neglect. It was the perfect meeting place, isolated, defensible, and forgotten by most. Michael had chosen well. As Catherine approached, she spotted the signs of careful preparation. Horses hidden in the old stable, subtle signals that the location was being watched. She gave the agreed-upon whistle, a meadowlark's call that was answered immediately from the bell tower. Inside the church, light from carefully shuttered lanterns revealed familiar faces. Jack Ironside Thompson, the legendary U.S. Marshal who'd brought order to the Dakota Territories, stood examining maps spread across an old altar. Beside him, Sarah Angel Eyes Hawkins cleaned her rifle with practiced precision. The famous frontier scout who'd single-handedly tracked down the Reeves gang. In the shadows, Catherine spotted the distinctive profile of Benjamin Ghostwalker Two Rivers, the half-Cheyenne tracker whose skills were whispered about in camps across the knee. Frontier. The records office occupied the back room of Judge Matthews' law practice, a modest wooden building set back from the main street. Catherine entered through the rear door, finding Michael hunched over a stack of documents, his expression grim. The former Texas Ranger had aged a decade in the past day, the weight of his discoveries evident in the new lines creasing his weathered face. "It's bigger than we thought," he said without preamble, spreading out a series of maps and legal documents. "Much bigger. Sullivan isn't just working for the mining company, he's part of something called the Western Development Syndicate. They've been doing this across 3 territories. Catherine studied the papers, her trained eye picking out patterns: mineral claims, land acquisitions, mysterious accidents, sudden changes in property ownership, all following a systematic pattern that stretched from Dakota to the Mexican border. "Look at this," Michael pointed to a list of names. "Every judge, sheriff, and territorial official who signed off on their land deals. Some are probably just corrupt, but others—" He tapped a particular document. Judge Roberts in Helena ruled in favor of the syndicate on every dispute. Then his daughter died in a stage accident a month later. The judge approved their biggest land grab yet. "Blackmail and intimidation," Catherine said softly, recognizing the tactics. "But on a scale I've never seen. It gets worse." Michael produced a telegram. "My contact in the capital came through. The syndicate isn't just after silver. They're mapping every valuable resource in the territory. Silver, gold, copper, cattle lands, water rights. They're trying to control everything." Catherine's mind raced through implications. "The mining surveys are real enough." "But they're not just planning mine sites," Michael finished. "They're identifying every valuable piece of land along the routes. Once the mines open, they'll control not just the resources, but how they move. A complete monopoly on the territory's future." A floorboard creaked, and both turned sharply, hands moving toward weapons. But it was only Maria slipping in through the back door. The cook's face was tight with worry. "More Black Hawk riders just came in," she reported in rapid Spanish. "At least 15 of them. They're setting up at the old Thompson place, bringing in supplies like they're planning to stay." "Sullivan's not taking chances," Michael growled. "He's preparing for trouble." Catherine moved to examine a particular map, one showing property ownership changes over the past year. A pattern emerged. The syndicate wasn't just buying land randomly. They were creating a network, each piece connecting to others in a carefully planned web of control. "There's something else," Maria added, her voice dropping lower. "I overheard Riley talking at the cantina. A special train is coming, due tomorrow night. They're calling it the Governor's Special." Michael and Catherine exchanged sharp looks. "Governor Henderson himself?" Michael asked. "Here?" "It makes sense," Catherine said, pieces clicking into place. "An operation this big would need protection at the highest levels. The governor signs territorial authorization for all major land deals. And he's up for re-election soon," Michael added. "Campaign funds have to come from somewhere." Catherine studied another document, this one showing a complex web of shell companies and property transfers. "The syndicate isn't just buying land, they're buying the whole territorial government. Judges, sheriffs, governors, everyone with power to stop them is either in their pocket or under their thumb." "Dios mío," Maria whispered. "How do we fight something this big?" Before Catherine could respond, the sound of approaching boots echoed from the law office's front room. Michael quickly gathered the documents, while Catherine moved to cover the door, her hand near her hidden weapon. Judge Matthew's voice carried through the thin walls, along with Sullivan's cultured tones, assured the governor that everything will be properly prepared for his arrival. The signing ceremony will legitimize all our previous acquisitions. "And the local opposition?" Sullivan asked. "Yet here you are," Sullivan mused, "a woman with no apparent background, no connections, suddenly appearing to claim Bennett's property through a perfectly legal but remarkably convenient purchase agreement. It makes one wonder what else might be hidden beneath the surface." Through the windows, Catherine caught glimpses of more Black Hawk riders taking positions around the saloon. Sullivan wasn't just here to intimidate, he was setting up for something more permanent. "I prefer to keep my business simple," Catherine said, her voice carrying an edge that made Riley's hand twitch toward his pearl-handled Remington. "Running my saloon, serving my customers. Simplicity is an admirable goal," Sullivan replied. "Unfortunately, the world is rarely simple. Take the recent disappearance of that mining engineer. Another tragic accident, according to official reports. Though it's curious how many accidents seem to happen around matters of property and mineral rights in this territory." Maria appeared in the kitchen doorway, her presence a silent reminder that there were still people willing to stand against the tide of progress Sullivan represented. The cook's hand clutched something under her apron. Catherine recognized the outline of the derringer she'd given her friend for protection. "Perhaps," Catherine suggested, maintaining her calm demeanor, "we should discuss what this conversation is really about." Sullivan smiled again, producing a document from his coat. "Direct and refreshing. Very well. This is a purchase offer for your establishment, significantly above market value. I encourage you to sign it now, avoiding any unfortunate complications that might arise from prolonged negotiation." Catherine glanced at the paper, noting the amount. It was enough money to live comfortably for years, assuming one lived to spend it. "And if I prefer to maintain my independence?" "Independence is an illusion, Miss Reynolds. Everyone answers to someone. The only real choice is whether to profit from inevitability or be crushed by it." Sullivan's tone hardened. "I should mention that my men discovered some concerning information about your past activities. Nothing concrete yet, but enough to warrant a more thorough investigation by territorial authorities." Catherine's mind raced. Had they discovered her true identity, or was this just another pressure tactic? Either way, the situation was escalating, faster than she'd anticipated. "You should know," Sullivan continued, "that I've sent telegrams to several territorial marshals requesting information about various unsolved matters. I expect responses any day now. It would be unfortunate if those responses contained anything compromising." The threat hung in the air like gunsmoke after a firefight. Catherine studied Sullivan's face, seeing the absolute certainty of a man accustomed to getting his way. Behind him, Hawkins' hand rested openly on his notched vest, while Riley's fingers flexed near his Remington. 24 hours, Sullivan said finally, placing the document on the bar. "Consider your position carefully, Miss Reynolds. By this time tomorrow, I expect your signature on that paper. After that," he gestured to his men, "the Black Hawk gang has ways of dealing with stubborn problems." As they moved toward the door, Sullivan paused. "Oh, and Miss Reynolds? I'd avoid any late-night rides out to the copper mine. The area can be dangerous after dark. Accidents happen so easily in the dark." After they left, Maria quickly locked the door. "They know something," she whispered. "About Michael's investigation, about the silver surveys, maybe both." Catherine moved to the window, watching Sullivan and his men ride away. The mining company man's threat had been clear: sign or suffer the consequences. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd assumed she was afraid of her past being exposed. In truth, Catherine's swift hand Reynolds had spent years building her reputation before vanishing into obscurity. If Sullivan's telegrams brought responses, they wouldn't expose a frightened woman hiding from her past. They'd reveal the legend of a gunslinger who'd never lost a fight, never missed a shot, and never backed down from justice. The afternoon. Heat pressed down on Shadow Creek like a heavy blanket as Catherine made her way through the town's back alleys. She'd traded her usual skirts for practical riding clothes, allowing freedom of movement and easy access to her hidden holsters. Michael's message had been urgent, something discovered in the Territorial Records Office that couldn't wait until nightfall. As she moved between buildings, Catherine noted subtle changes in the town's atmosphere. More Black Hawk riders lounging on street corners, watching everything with predatory eyes. Shopkeepers hurried about their business, avoiding eye contact. The shadow of fear Sullivan cast was growing darker by the hour. Catherine moved to the window, watching rain pound the empty street. In the distance, lightning illuminated the hills where the copper mine lay hidden, where even now Sullivan's men were quietly stealing the territory's future. She thought about Riley's practiced gun hand, about Hawkins's notched vest, about all the signs that said this situation would end in violence. First, she said finally, we gather proof, names, dates, evidence that can't be buried in territorial politics. Her hand unconsciously brushed the hidden holster where her Colt rested, a motion Michael didn't miss. Then, Maria prompted, then we remind the Black Hawk gang why they used to call me Swift Hand. Dawn painted the Montana sky in shades of amber and gold as Catherine stood in the saloon's back doorway, watching the town slowly come to life. The storm had passed, leaving puddles that reflected the morning light like scattered mirrors. A trained eye caught details others might miss. Fresh hoofprints circling the building, a cigar butt of expensive Eastern tobacco near the water trough, signs that the Black Hawk gang had kept watch through the night. The sound of approaching horses drew her attention. Through the morning mist, she spotted Sheriff Clayton riding alongside Sullivan himself. The mining company man cut an impressive figure on his black stallion, his military bearing evident even in civilian clothes. His silver hair and neat mustache projected an image of distinguished authority. But Catherine noted how his right hand never strayed far from his holstered revolver. Looks like they're making their morning rounds early, Maria observed, appearing at Catherine's shoulder. Sullivan usually waits until after breakfast to start his intimidation visits. He's accelerating his timeline, Catherine replied softly, watching the pair dismount outside the saloon's front entrance. Michael's discovery at the mine must have them worried. The batwing doors creaked as Sullivan and Clayton entered, their spurs ringing against the wooden floor. Catherine had already moved behind the bar, assuming the role of simple saloon proprietor with practiced ease. She kept her movements unhurried as she wiped down the already clean counter. "Miss Reynolds?" Sullivan's voice carried the cultured tones of Eastern education. "I trust you had an enlightening conversation with Mr. Hawkins yesterday evening." Catherine noticed how Sheriff Clayton positioned himself near the door, his discomfort evident in his rigid posture. The man's badge might represent the law, but it was clear who really held authority in Shadow Creek. Mr. Hawkins was quiet, persuasive in his suggestions about business partnerships, Catherine replied, her tone carefully neutral. Sullivan smiled, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. "Progress requires cooperation, Miss Reynolds. The mining company brings opportunities that will transform this territory. Smart business owners understand the importance of being on the right side of history." "And the wrong side?" Catherine asked, noting how Clayton flinched at her direct question. "Progress can be difficult for those who resist it." Sullivan moved to examine the gun collection on the wall, his attention focusing on a particular Winchester rifle. "I understand you're something of a firearms enthusiast. This is excellent craftsmanship, 1873 model if I'm not mistaken. The gun that won the West, they say." Just preserving history, Catherine replied, watching his hands hover near the weapon. Most of those pieces haven't been fired in years. Sullivan turned, fixing her with a penetrating stare. History is a fascinating subject. Take this territory, for example, rich in history, richer still in untapped potential, the kind of potential that could make or break fortunes depending on who controls it. The saloon door opened again, admitting Hawkins and his lieutenants. They moved with practiced coordination, Riley taking position near the stairs, while Davis covered the kitchen entrance. The message was clear. No exits, no escape. I've been reviewing property records, Sullivan continued, his tone conversational despite the mounting tension. Interesting how you acquired this establishment, old Tom Bennett's accident, falling down those mine shaft stairs in the dark. Tragic, very tragic. Agreed. Catherine's fingers absently traced the bar's edge, measuring distances, noting positions. The sheriff conducted a thorough investigation, as I recall. Clayton shifted uncomfortably. Nothing suspicious was found, he muttered, not meeting anyone's eyes.